There, and it randomly starts like right now. This Life in Tech, episode 125. I'm Jason.
And I'm TK.
And no Dan.
I know we're a Dan-free zone today. I don't know how that's going to work out.
The first thing that popped in my mind yesterday when we were texting was, oh shit, we can have like a serious conversation without any kind of numbskull interruption.
Yeah, but that's part of his charm.
Well, Dan, yeah, man, he keeps you on his toes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, what's been going on this week?
Oh man, this was my first week off, which I always struggle with because, well, there's always something to do, and I don't know that I ever really have a vacation. I don't need it really, but not having classes until August, I've just kind of really put myself into our farming.
That's awesome. And it's good you get the break, right? Because now in North Carolina, especially, it's prime season to do so.
Yeah, man. Well, in fact, it was perfect timing. Per the Farmer's Almanac, which is eerily accurate, man. Eerily accurate. Yesterday was our big sowing season.
Cool.
The end of it, really. And so we had, over the winter, I started onions, tomatoes, different kinds of peppers, hot peppers, sweet peppers, so forth and so on, beans, different things. And I built like these little custom grow boxes out of Rubbermaid tins, and then I lined them with tin foil, and then I use lamps to give them the light. And that worked wonderfully, man, wonderfully. But we needed to get that all into the ground. Now, maybe about a month ago, when the ground finally got dry enough to bring a tractor in, we plowed. And then it rained so much, man, it washed out. It not only washed out my rows, but it washed out the few plants that I had put in the ground. So we had to start over. And so, man, we must have put a couple hundred plants and seeds in the ground yesterday.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool.
What have you been up to?
I'm over here in Kosovo right now, working with Artillery One and Century Cybersecurity, which we have a joint venture with, and a bunch of cool, really smart dudes. And they're moving into their new office this week, and so we've been doing all that. So it's been really fun.
I really like that conference room. I'm assuming that was a conference room you put on.
Yeah. It's the classroom / conference room, and the whole new office has that industrial vibe to it. The boys did a great job with that. I mean, it's just amazing. In fact, when we're done here, I'm going to walk back over to the office. They're busy working, getting the networking piece done, building the servers and stuff like that. So, so we can move in there effectively and just hit the ground running early this week. So no, it's amazing. I love it over here. I always have for the past 20 years. And so it's always good to be back and kind of good to do the show live from, as I always say, Kosovo, USA.
Yeah, right. Well, I've always personally, I've not traveled through Eastern Europe, but I've always had an affinity for the culture and especially the climate.
Yep.
Man, that's exciting, dude. And it's exciting to find. Yeah, right. And I always find that people are just people, man. It doesn't matter really where you go. There's good people, there's bad people, there's people that are interested in things you're interested in, and somehow we all figure it out. You know what I mean?
I'll tell you what, the Kosovars, and I mean, I've traveled extensively around the world, and the Kosovars are some of the most gracious people I've ever met in my life. It feels like family when I come back over here, and I truly mean that. They're really nice, and everyone you meet. 20 years ago when I was here, there was an Italian restaurant that had great pizza called Spaghetti Tony's. And when I was looking for, I went right back to where it used to be, which is now in the big main square called Nana Teresa. Everybody walks up and down. It's restaurants and hotels and stuff. It's really nice. And it was gone. And one of the locals said, well, it's still here. I just don't know where it is in town. And that was when I came back over here at the beginning of the year. When I was here a month ago, haphazardly, I was walking around and I just found it. And when I walked in, I looked at this older gentleman, and he looked at an older gentleman in me, and he's like, I know you from somewhere. And we rekindled that, right? And that's the nature of the people here is they love America. They love Americans. And they view us as their liberator, not their oppressor. And that's been a big thing in this region for them over hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
It's an enjoyment to work with them every day of the week.
That's fantastic, man. I think those kinds of stories are the ones that need to be told more, to be honest with you. Because, yeah, man, I mean, that's a pretty bloody region historically. I mean, certainly within my lifetime, right? But it's not all doom and gloom, throughout the world. There's actually good people spread across all kinds of cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And right? You just what's your worldview that you yourself are looking for? I mean, that's kind of what you're gonna be primed for, I think.
Well, I think right now we've exhausted all the usable news material on kumbaya happiness, and it's much easier to talk about the people that hate us, right?
Sure.
And look at that. And I think that the Kosovar people in general, they don't want to leave the country. It's one of the great things. I mean, you have people that want to emigrate and things like that, and they went from having UN mission passports to, as a country now, having their own passports. In fact, when I was flying back in a month ago, I was in Istanbul getting on the last leg of the flight to come here. And then for somebody who was here in '99, when kind of all the consternation was going on and the war was going on, to see 4 or 5 people in front of you, 2 or 3 of them have Kosovo passports, but more importantly, 2 of them have American passports that are Kosovars, and they're coming back to the country and they want to be there. And I think for the investment we've made in the company here is all of these unbelievably smart, gifted, talented people. They want to stay here. They want that tide to lift the collective boat of Kosovo. And technology, I think, is a vehicle to do it, because you don't have to physically be there.
Yeah.
And they just need access to the Western markets. Right.
Right.
And I think that's really, really where we're at. And I think, that's what we provide them. And like I said, I can't, short of sitting in my house, watching the family do something, being here is my next favorite thing. So
and I think that's one of the beauties of modern technology is that, like when you were a kid in the 80s and me growing up in the 90s, late 80s.
You're being generous on that kid in the 80s.
The question was always, how can I actually create what I have in my head, like as an idea? How do I manifest that? And we just didn't have the tools so much, right? And that's easily solved now. And now the problem is distribution, which you just mentioned. Like, how do you actually get discovered? How do you disseminate ideas? And this is, over the last few years, one of the obsessions I've had is, man, there's a phenomenal amount of talent spread across the world. And it's easy to generate content, relatively speaking, but it's hard to have people actually find that content as it exists. I mean, think about YouTube. Like last night, I went down a rabbit hole of Mesopotamian mythology. And I'd never heard of these YouTubers before. I'd never seen them. I clicked on a video or two, and then the algorithm kicked in, as it should, and started spitting me all these recommendations. And they were fucking fantastic, man.
Right.
And I love that stuff, especially on a Saturday night. I've had a couple of beers and I just want to relax. And otherwise, I wouldn't have ever found that stuff, man.
Well, I think it's the equivalent of, we used to just, shut off the TV and read, right?
Yeah.
And now you have this, it's one of the things that frustrates me about people in education and stuff. And where, we joke around, they put, Jay Leno or somebody in the streets and they ask them who the vice president is and they don't know, but they know all 5 Kardashians, right? In some form, I think that we've taken being blissfully unaware to like a Zen-like state in certain things. But, if you want to get interested in something, you have it. I mean, over here, one of the big programs that they have at Century is Cyber Academy. And it's born out of the fact that, Eastern European university education traditionally is really good on the fundamentals of science and math, right? They're not very good on the applied piece. And so you have all these young, talented people out here that want to learn. And they've built this incredible program of high-level education for cyber training, from very basic tasks all the way up to some of the highest level stuff that you can see. And we've talked about that in the back end that they're building and things like that. And I think that, identifying that need here and saying, hey, we're going to fix that, because what are they ultimately trying to do? We're trying to keep people here, right? So that the economic situation in this country gets better and it's not relying on 20th century industry and things like that. And you could make this a great tech hub just by the fact that, there's a willingness to educate, right? I don't want you to come to me fully educated. I want you to learn, and I want you to enjoy learning. And I think a lot of times, and I think we talked about this before in the public school system, right? A lot of them that have the standardized testing that put it on the students, you're basically saying, hey, we're going to tie federal funding to student success, and we're going to measure the student and not the educator.
Yeah, right.
And in doing that, they now have to teach the test to ensure that funding. And you're taking the, hey, I want to learn how to learn. I want the joy of being inquisitive and things like that. Because if you look, certainly when I was in high school in the 70s and early 80s and then in college, if you wanted to take a computer class and you wanted to go learn how to do Fortran or COBOL or any of those languages, you had to go and schedule time at the computer lab.
Right.
So you really had to want to do it. Right. Now I can sit in my dorm room, my apartment, my house, whatever. I can just go online and take a course.
Well, yeah, and the access is 100% disposable at this point.
Right. And I think that, I think we talked about this last week or one of the other times is, I think coding and, the basics of coding, server guys and things like that, those are going to be the blue collar jobs of the 21st century. That's the 20th, that's a welder, right? That's a plumber, right? And I think when you look at Google and some of the bigger companies now saying, hey, we're not in that holy grail of every kid has to go to MIT or Cal Poly or the things. It's like smart people happen everywhere. And it's largely because of the distribution of knowledge via the internet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Not only as technical, well, I view it as the combination of two primary things. Wealth is much more highly distributed worldwide. I mean, prosperity, right?
Right.
And so as that prosperity distributes across cultures and across countries, it's natural that a lot of that gets allocated to technology and infrastructure.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the 21st century incarnation of technology. It's really the World Wide Web, right?
Right.
And it's just one giant fucking library. Not everything's good in it, right?
Right.
But we really haven't figured out the curation piece yet. But it's all there, man. I mean, and literally we all said this when we were talking about if you only had one piece of tech to take to an island, most of us would take our mobile phones.
Right.
Well, what more do you really need? I mean, my screen's big enough. I read on it. Anyway.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm over here. I'm not bringing I got a computer and I've got my phone. And if I want to read a book at night, I'll read a book.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to where reading a book is, I like it. I mean, I think fundamentally I listen to a lot more Audible now. And when I'm driving around as opposed to just listening to mindless crap on the radio.
Right.
But, I take the train back and forth to DC quite frequently, and I'll just put my headphones in and I'll be, doing some light stuff on the computer and listening to a book.
Yeah. Well, and it's not that different than the Matrix when they got loaded into the construct to receive their training. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. We put in this hydroponic vertical garden, right? And we knew up front we have no electricity. Like, I can't run an extension cord from the house that's on that part of the property because it's an old school cinder block house. There's no external outlets. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm like, well, how the fuck am I going to get power? I guess I got to do solar. Dude, I've never built a solar rig ever, but I understand the fundamental parts. So I ordered them off Amazon. They got here the next day. Beautiful. Right. And I figured out most of it, but there was something I wanted to be very careful about because it's power and electricity. Dude, on demand, I just brought up a YouTube video. Here's how you hook this part up. Right. Done.
That's right. I think now when people say they can't do something, there's an intellectual laziness that goes on with that. I mean, I was very fortunate growing up that my father fixed everything, right? And it was a point of pride to him. We never took a car to the garage. Right. Back in the old days, when metallurgy and lubricants weren't what they are today, every 20, 30,000 miles, you had to take the back axles off the car and go have new bearings pressed on them so they function right in the differential. That was a Saturday morning job for us. That wasn't drop the car off somewhere. And so I feel very fortunate that, I look at the world as something that can be fixed, that as long as you got the right tools, right?
Yeah.
So my dad used to say, a lot of times getting all your tools together takes longer than doing the job.
Sure.
Right? And now one of your tools is a YouTube video.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's that on-demand knowledge, you know what I mean? And it's certainly more consumable more rapidly than trying to read a manual, for instance. I do the same thing with my bikes. Like, with the cars we have now, I don't know that really, other than like some minor things, you can really do that kind of jazz, right? But with bicycles, you can, because they're fundamentally the same.
Right.
They're not computerized, so forth and so on. And so, just as part of the hobby, over the years, I've collected enough tools that I can do everything on a bike.
Right.
And I don't always remember how to do something because it's not something you do but once a year or whatever, right?
Right.
And you just pull up a video and there you go. You're done.
It's just like, you and I bang on computers every day, but I've got to go reset an old Mac that I'm going to give to my daughter. how do I restore that? That's crap in my head. I don't need down I don't have to have that at the tip of my fingers.
That's
So
right.
boom, okay, I'm going to go to YouTube. All right. Somebody will show me what buttons I got to push and it'll happen in half an hour.
I think you're spot on though, man. It's the combination of two things again for me. It's having the right tools assembled so that you have them in the right order. And then one thing I've always tried to focus on is like a fundamental pattern is learning how to ask the right questions or ask better questions. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
you can ask general questions and then you got to sort through all this information, which again, I don't think we're really good at curating information yet. Not digitally, right?
Well, I think, knowing you and Dan like I do, one of the things that always, and I think this comes from the fact that you both have doctorates and you have to be efficient at how you grab information and cite it and everything like that, is your ability to go in with all the modifiers on a Google search is much better than mine, right? I make mistakes all the time. Well, that has nothing to do with what I am because I'm not specific enough or I don't delimit enough to really get that specific information. I think that, our kids don't, the Google is the library of the 21st century, right?
It is.
Both my kids, they're much better at this, with ands, pluses, minuses, colons and all the stuff you use to do those searches in the fashion that you can optimize it. And I don't think I'm terrible at it, but I'm not. I frustrate myself sometimes when I'm in a hurry looking for something and go, why did I type that? That has nothing to do with what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, man, I'll tell you this though. I have a huge step ahead because my mom was a public librarian.
Right.
And so I literally grew up in a library and all we had was the giant card catalog.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, what we have now mimics that to some degree. There's parts of the old system that I think were better, like the Dewey Decimal System. If
Right.
you look at a library and how information is organized.
Yeah.
I still like that. And I'm probably just biased because I can still tell you what books are in which section by hundreds of numbers. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's fundamentally the same idea. I mean, you had to start with a question of some sort or some words, you call them keywords or phrases, and there you go.
Yeah, no, like I said, that's what children are really good at. I mean, when Jared is a junior at VCU right now, and when he was, I think, a sophomore or junior in high school, so 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, one of the I think the headmaster at the time or one of the the senior people at the school said, this is probably the last round of books we're ever going to commit to buying.
Yeah.
Right. And the kids have summer reading and things like that, but those are all paperbacks and things like that. But finding information, having a book, it's less and less, and they'll come home with worksheets, and a lot of times those worksheets are driving them to a URL.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. Plus Google Education now, every kid has a computer, and the information's out there to be found.
Well, I can tell you, this kind of surprised me, given my predilection for technology. When I was kind of getting on board with High Point, I went and had a discussion with the dean, the chair, and some people, and the head of IT, and they're definitely looking, at least within the computer science department, probably the whole engineering school, to completely replace all textbooks with a school-issued iPad and then access to the textbooks electronically.
Right. I'm that way. I mean, I travel all the time. I don't, not so much now, but when I was working at Blackbird and I was in front of students and we're teaching technology every day of the week, I had a tremendous amount of reference material, and that would have been a whole other traveling big bag of books or stuff. Yeah. So it was just very easy to have it. Plus, with the ability to annotate things and put that in an index that you can go find quickly, it was a no-brainer for me to do that.
Yeah. Well, and so of course I asked, well, what's kind of driving this? Because it's always the students, right? And it should be. Yeah. It should be. Yeah. If I would have guessed it's cost, because textbooks, as you know, are just perversely expensive.
Right.
That was number 2. Number 1 was exactly what you just said. Students generally don't want to carry around so many heavy textbooks. Right. Because there's an alternative, which is much more efficient.
I mean, just physically. I mean, think about when we were kids, like some of the big old backpacks. That was a big thing when the kids are little, right? Is they're very conscious of the little bodies in these big backpacks and how many the teachers are actually walking to the log. You don't need that. You don't need that. This is what you need to bring home, because you've seen the one where the backpack is at the top of the kid's neck and down over his behind because the kid's 4 feet tall and the backpack's 2 feet tall.
Yeah, exactly. Well, shit, man. I mean, my sophomore year in undergrad, I made a catastrophic mistake. See, this is where, to me, good mentorship is invaluable. I made a catastrophic mistake. In one semester, I had anatomy and physiology, microbiology, biochem, and botany. And I had those classes back to back on the same days, like right, hour after hour.
Right.
So I had to take all those texts at once. I couldn't go back to my dorm and come back.
Right.
And so I had this 75-pound rucksack full of books and manuals and bullshit. And I don't know if it was the intellectual exhaustion after that semester, because it was way too much. Nobody should have ever let me do that. Or
Right.
it was the physical exhaustion from lugging that shit around. I almost quit, man. I almost just said, I'm done. I can't do it. I switched to English. That's how I got to English. I'm like, I don't want all these big textbooks anymore. Give me the small little paperbacks.
I think that's the key, though, right? With the cost of education today, when I graduated in high school in 1982, all in, University of Massachusetts Lowell, that's books, food, the whole 9 yards, was $6,000 a year. You could make a mistake. You could spend an extra semester at school. You could do all these things without breaking the bank. And while
Right.
most public universities, I think, on a glide slope haven't increased, I remember Boston College was $24,000 a year in 1981, and my parents and everybody thought that was extortionate, right?
Yeah.
It's $76,000 a year. And if you're going to send your kid there, you're making a $400,000 commitment to excellence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of it is, and if you're looking at the public system where, and I'll use Virginia as an example because it's the only one I really know, is you've spent so much time teaching these kids how to take tests and passing that test that, with very few exceptions, does everybody know what they want to do when they enter school.
Right.
And if you don't have a system of counselors when they're getting ready to go, and I think that freshman orientation is huge, to sit down with the counselors and get that. I mean, Jared now he didn't know what he wanted to do when he got out of school. He had no idea what he wanted to do. But now as a junior, he's got it all together, and he relies heavily on a counselor to get him where he needs to go so he can graduate on time. All right, and he puts the effort in to go there, right? And I think that's another thing is, like, in life, what's the level of effort you're willing to put in to participate?
Right. Well, and I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. That advisor, mentor, whatever you want to call it, and they're different things to different people, is invaluable. And like, I stand back and I think about it, and why is it surprising to people that an 18, 19, 20-year-old has no clue what they want to do with the rest of their life, dude? The rest of their life.
Yeah.
Well, of course they don't. I mean, they don't even cognitively, they're not really aware of who they are yet. It's not until you get to 21, 22.
Right. There's a lot of schools out there. I think the one that leaps to mind, because I think they were kind of at the forefront of doing this, University of Chicago, where they said you can't pick a major.
Yeah.
We have 2 years of core courses that will set you up for success the last 2 years. And you're not messing around. I mean, you're getting probably 75, 80 credits in those first 2 years, because it's literature, it's art, it's math, it's science, all the basics, things that I think, and this, I might be in the minority here, things that I think the human race should be conversational in.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
Right? I mean, you don't have to understand how to launch crap into space, but you should have a pretty good idea that it's a rocket, and this is what, all the things that go on with it, right?
Right.
And it's not Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote version, right? That, this is why it works, right? When I say 9.8 meters per second squared, I shouldn't confuse adults about what that number means and why it's important.
Right.
Right. And I think that's the fundamental inquisitive nature, and we joke around all the time. It's that, when the guys go out in the streets and they show a picture of, the Supreme Court out of their robes and nobody knows who it is.
Right.
But yet they know all 5 Kardashians. Like, you've got a certain amount of time every day to be smart and to contemplate the world. Right. And I'm not telling you to do it the way I do it, or contemplate what I contemplate, because the reason that the world is great and we do a lot of different things is because there's interest, right?
Yeah.
But of different things, but being inquisitive and getting that as an adult. Even now, I mean, it's when you talk about mentorship or teaching, when I first retired from the Navy, I went to work for a big tech company. We built a program of technical education. And the best part about it was that it forced me to contemplate and think about technology in a way I never would have done on my own. And to give me not only a breadth of knowledge, but a technical depth because I'm in front of people, and you have to be competent. And even like mentorship's the same way, right? I mean, if you're going to commit to be a mentor for somebody for whatever it is, you know, talking out of your behind probably isn't the best course of action, right? And so I think that keeps you on your toes and keeps you inquisitive, especially as you get older, right? Because I think, you know, people live longer that are inquisitive. I think they're healthier and things like that, because your mind function and what's going on with your mind feeds the rest of your existence.
Yeah.
And I think that's hugely important.
Well, and this ties back to this whole conversation we've been having, weaving in and out around competency in the mentors, in the teachers, so forth and so on. I've always been, not only for myself, but everybody around me, a huge proponent of competency, let's say in examinations. And it's not because there's people I don't like that I want to weed out. It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with, look, man, at a minimum with an undergraduate, I'm probably going to be in their life for 4 years. And I'm probably going to talk to them a lot, because I like to talk to people a lot. And I like to imagine myself to be kind of this neo-shaman type archetype. Well, I better know how to advise people.
Right.
I'm not a psychologist. I don't want to be a therapist, but I want to help people be better at whatever they want to be better at, right? And you can't half-ass that. There's definitely more ways to get that wrong than in order to get it right. You know what I mean?
Right. I say to people all the time, or, you know, you don't have to change the whole world. I'm just saying, be better tomorrow than you were yesterday.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And I think with young people, and we've talked about that before, I think the big challenge, especially if somebody goes away and they're going to university or college for the first time, is there's two big challenges. There's one, how do I become a college student, right, academically? And then how do I become a college student socially and fit in? And if one of those is way out of whack, or one of them is half out of whack and the other one is really out of whack, there's not a long-term success rate. Right. And so, you know, I mean, it's hard, you know, I tell people this all the time, and I think I mentioned this before. If you give me a problem and tell me to fix it in New York City, I think I can do it. But then you put it over 6 time zones and 370 million people and say, one of the most important things we can do is make sure the next generation of people aren't potato heads. How are we going to get there? And what, you know, whether it's from how are we going to agree on what we pay the teachers? You know, how much do we create public schools and turn them into cathedrals, right, of higher learning? And what emphasis do we put on that? And I think it, you know, to a certain extent, and it's probably different in college, but, you know, parents going in and saying, hey, why did you give my son or daughter a D? I didn't. They earned it. Right? That's the grade that they earned, right? And I think that's different from certainly in the 70s and 80s when I was there. If I got a bad grade in school, it was my fault, not anybody else's, right? And I think now we focus a little bit more externally, and I think you should, right? I think that just like any other publicly stewarded program, what's the level of oversight we're going to have on it and why, right? And it's, you know, and we can argue about teachers striking and things like that, but at the end of it is, I hear you want more money. But if we're going to say we're going to make public education the pride of what we do, then in order to have it be the pride of what we do, there has to be some level of accountability. And I think that accountability should be in competency testing on a regular basis for the teachers. And we can argue about whether it needs to be every 3 years or 5 years or whatever. But I don't want to hop on an airplane if the pilot hasn't recently proved that he's still competent.
Yeah. Well, and the science behind how to establish these competency programs, at least in university systems, is deep. I mean, people have spent a lot of time figuring out how to appropriately measure and reinforce competency, let's say in undergraduate faculty.
Right.
See, and this is interesting, man, because to me, it loops back again. And the idea that we're really good at like collecting and shipping information over digital means right now. We're not very good at curating that information yet. I think social media is a good intermediary step to where we're going to get. That's my personal opinion. Yep. But this is part of the issue too, is the reason the Kardashians are so popular, in my opinion, is because we've allowed the curation of social information to be focused on that. Right. And I think that's part of what I like about like these conversations, right? Particularly with you, is it's a conversation of, you know, it's not that I dislike the Kardashians. It's not that I really have an opinion because I don't consume that media. But I think it speaks to as a culture and a society, how do we want to curate our cultural information? What is significant to us? Because what do we want to be culturally? You know, what is America?
Well, I think when you start talking about curating information, let's look at Instagram right now because they're talking about taking the the
Mhm.
number of like being able to view that, and who are you saving from that, right? And what level of if we're not going to say, because really probably what they're worried about is younger folks,
Mhm.
right? Because that's a social thing of am I pretty and am I popular and things like that. Well, we all grew up with that, but it was on a one-to-one level,
Right.
right? And so if we're going to live, you can't, I can't raise my kids the same way that my parents raised me if for no other reason that the world that they live in is different than the world I grew up in.
Right. Well
Right? I
said.
mean, plainly stated, right? And so if one of your jobs is to prepare your kids for success in life, I feel that one of those jobs is to thicken their skin, not to make them callous or another thing. Because I think right now, one of the things you hear in public all the time is, oh, you're offending me, you need to stop. There's no guarantee of not being offended. In fact, I have a definite right to offend you, right? I don't have a right to demean you, right? I have a right to disagree with you. And if you find that offensive, then we're in really big trouble because no great, leap in technology and social, in religion or anything has come without argument, without dissent, right? That's, if you look at the Supreme Court, for example, and if you look at when a Republican president's there, they pick a president or a Supreme Court justice that fills their fills their and their constituency's worldview. Same with the Democrats, and sometimes people are surprised at that,
Right.
right? It's like,
Yeah.
but at some point, you have to say, I want to have really deep opinional differences on a body like the Supreme Court, because if you look back, like the civil rights movement, if you look at Jeremiah's on Jim Crow and all the other great cases of dissent, they all led to something better becoming a society, right? And I think
Yeah.
the removal of offense or the removal of, hey, I'm not the most popular person on earth. Well, okay, that's great. If that's what you want to do, plan your course to be that, and don't let the fact that 5 people liked your stuff instead of 500 be the delimiter. And I think if we kind of glass wall our youth and say, oh, we got to hold on to you. Then when they're 18 and they don't know what they want to do, well, they weren't forced to contemplate that when they were kids. Their parents were just, thinking. Now, the other side of that is parents that provide no institutional control over what their kids consume and why, right?
Right.
Then,
Right.
but is that Instagram or Facebook's responsibility to do that?
I don't think so. No.
I don't know. I don't either. Right. And but this whole concept that we want to white label everything so that nobody gets offended, that's detrimental to society. Right. And
yeah. Well, I think it's unfortunate because it diffuses the responsibility for your own sovereignty and freedom as a human being, the way I look at it. And that gets pretty heavy, but that's how I view it. I mean, look,
as you get older, right? When you're 25, what you're willing to say to other people is thing. But when I was growing up, if you wanted to say that and you wanted other people to hear you, they had to be in front of you. And so you had that construct of, is this guy going to punch me in the face? Or am I really going to offend somebody? And is what I'm saying inappropriate for that audience? Well, now when you hide behind the scope of social media, now you lose it. But here's the thing. Social media is not going away.
No.
Right.
No.
So we have to start saying, hey, I hear you. Right. You vehemently disagree with this. Right. And it's the age old problem of the First Amendment. Right. Free speech is hard. Right. You have to be willing to stand there and listen to somebody shout at the top of their lungs something that you disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that you would spend the rest of your life shouting against them. That's free speech. Right.
That's right.
That's what drives, and now today that's what drives people crazy is I don't want to listen to you if I don't disagree with you. That and the concept that I don't have to agree with you and I can still like you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's such a strange thing to some
people.
I don't get it. Like, I had this conversation with a group of friends when I was still in California where I said something to the effect of, I feel empathetic and sympathetic for this situation that this one person is in, but that doesn't mean I particularly like them. Like, I'm not going to go have a beer with them, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't help them or so forth and so on. And that seemed so confusing to the people I was talking to. And I don't understand that. Like, I don't have to agree. I don't have to like. I don't have to anything to have that divorced from this situation that is what we're actually talking about. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think the next step of that from a thought process is I disagree with you. I disagree with that guy over there, right? Vehemently. And he's got his own opinion, which because I disagree with him is probably not the most positive. He could be in the same boat as I'm. Like, I really don't agree with him. I don't want to deal with that guy. All right. But when you start talking about having empathy, that's, hey, I see him laying down on the other side of the road. I walk across the street and I pick him up. Right. It doesn't change the fact that I disagree with him, but it also says, hey, look, I don't have to agree with you to like you. Right. I think that's the toxic thing that we deal right now. And that's what fuels social media.
Yeah. There's these, I see a lack of adherence to a hierarchy of let's say higher order constructs, right? So like if you take the highest order construct that human life is precious and should be preserved, right, that supersedes whether I agree with the speech you're engaging
right, exactly.
in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think that's that fabric. I see it as like a fabric woven into social structure that we've kind of lost track of because social media inappropriately right now, because of the way it works, allows that all to be collapsed down to likes and comments. You know what I mean? It's subscription.
Yeah.
It gets all manifested into this one click.
Right.
I don't know, man. I've said before, I think I would like to see what happens if your biological identity got tied to your social media accounts. There's no more avatars. It's you, and it's clearly you.
Right. Well, I mean, how many people now, when you click on social media, that they've got an avatar or they got a picture of their dog or something like that, and you're like, okay, I'm immediately less predisposed to friend this person if they reach out to me because I want to know even if it's a picture of somebody that's not them, right? Yeah. If you look across my social media, and I'm more of a consumer than a provider in social media. Some of it is I don't think everybody on the planet wants to hear what I have to say, and so I stay away from it. That if you look, my picture across every social media platform is uniform. Mm-hmm. Right? Some of that's for business reasons that people, okay, I know who he is, or that's who he is on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn will tell you that your chance of getting a job or becoming, whatever you want LinkedIn to be for you is demonstrably reduced if you don't have a picture. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that physical ownership goes back to, hey, we used to sit in a room and talk to each other. And then, and you look at, and not to go wildly off topic, but, we started out having the town crier. Everybody would gather around, and the one dude that could read or the one dude that could remember the information the king put out would come down and tell you what went on. Right. Then we went to the printing press, but it still was a one to many. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And there was control. It got posted up on a tree, and everybody went to read it. Then we had newspapers, and it was still people delivering information to you, and the comment to that information was very difficult. You had to write a letter to the editor and hope that they picked what you said and all the other things, right? The internet is the first place where you can have instantaneous discourse, right? And that's, I think that's sometimes we don't handle that well, right? And then people want to regulate it. It's like, hold on. We're at a time in history where the world is at our fingertips from a knowledge, from a getting your idea across, right? And I think now when you start talking about labeling people and labeling thought, it's not done with any other purpose than to abridge that free speech, right? And saying one group has a better right to and access to media, and what is it? It's algorithm driven. And if who's in charge of putting that algorithm in, and how does that get tweaked? Right. And that's, and because there's a huge deficit of competently trained cyber people, right? And you can say cyber as server guy all the way up to the most dedicated offensive guy on planet Earth. And, just in the federal government, the US alone, they think there's about a deficit of 3 million competent people. Right. Now, granted, that's the biggest employer in the U.S. is the federal government, but that's 3 million Americans. And how are they hurdling that deficit? They're trying to do it with machine learning and AI. Right. Well, and who is accountable for that algorithm-driven nonsense? Right. You and I might disagree on something, and you want the algorithm to say something come out and say, here's my opinion, and look, it supports my opinion. Right? And I think that's kind of the hazard we've got to, that's the big water hazard we got to navigate around as we're going down the fairway of information science.
Yeah, well, no, well put, man. I mean, I view it a lot like, well, I have a 4.5-year-old, right? And so we try to be very diligent about not curbing her curiosity. Like we kind of let her try things within tolerances, right? And it's simply because she's at that stage where she's very curious naturally. All kids are, because that's how they learn, right? And she asks tons of questions. Why?
Right.
And if you don't, it's not even not curbing it, it's also encouraging it. They get stunted, right? Developmentally, they can be stunted that way. And I view our use, particularly of social media, the same way, where we're 4.5-year-olds turned loose with this tool. And we're just trying to figure out how to make it work, man. And there's parts of it that work really well, and there's parts of it that I think we could probably agree don't work very well at all.
We're running around the house with a diaper on and nothing else 5 minutes before bath time, right?
Yeah.
Hands in the air doing this,
Right. And so the idea of that somehow being artificially limited because of offense or political gain or maneuvering, it's like the absolute wrong time to do it, because we're not even sure what the fuck it is yet.
Here's the thing. If somebody's doing something illegal, they need to be in the same way you want to take criminals off the street, in the physical world, it's the same thing. Right. But who's the hall monitor for, all of that? Right. And again, it's the good guys are always chasing the bad guys, right? The bad guys are one step ahead, whether it's the dark web or this or whatever people are working on next to say, hey, we're going to obfuscate information for our own gain, right? And I mean, people look at the dark web, and I've heard some nonsense recently where, and these were trained professionals that are putting information out in courseware and everything that said, oh, with the dark web, you need all this special equipment. No, I don't. I just go download a Tor browser and I start typing in .onion until I find all the crazy crap I want to deal with.
Yeah.
Right?
This is a great story real quick, man, about the first time I went on the dark web. So I was just curious, man, of course, and I wanted to see what was up and
how it happened.
Yeah, right. Well, and I remember being at the DEF CON when the original team released the Tor protocol. And I was always very curious about anonymized onion networks and shit like that. And so years later, this is only a few years ago, I actually download the right components, get on, and the first thing I find, man, was classic. For $10,000 US, you could get a vial, and I quote, of Madonna's arsehole sweat. I'm like, dude, this is glorious. This is glorious.
But that's, and there's a dude right there going, he's like 3 more weeks and I can scrape the cash together, right?
Yeah.
It's the old Jeff Foxworthy joke. If you've ever financed the tattoo, right? It's more payments and this baby's mine, right? But I think the dark web right now, and one of the things that is like, we can go if I'm going to as a sales technique, right? We're selling our ability to do security testing and then remediate that as an MSSP. That I can go on the dark web and I can go check for your email domain, right? And the guys that we have, that's one of their core things, and they've got an engine that runs it, and it just goes in there and says, hey, tell me at whatever.com, and it'll bring back email addresses. And so before you go to a client, I'm all about, because we got 700 plus email addresses from an entity that we're trying to do business with, and with the passwords associated with them. Do you know how much that costs us on the dark web? $1.
Yeah.
Right? We're not doing anything illegal. The information's out there. Right? Or am I doing anything illegal by buying it? No, I'm doing something illegal if I turn around and log into that computer and start attacking that computer or attacking that network, right?
Right.
And some of it is we've showed people, and they're like, "Oh, that's not my password." I'm like, "It's not your email password, but you've used that email to associate with one of your other accounts. And once somebody knows your username, they'll just cycle through all your social media accounts until they find an in, right? And then and then it's a different story. But I think we've created this black box mentality that we shouldn't have to know about. And I think that inquisitive nature in kids is why I like that, right? I mean, tell me, what do you need to know, right? And that's I mean, it slows down as the kids get older because they have their own mechanisms to find it, and if they're in a good school system, then they're getting, they're getting that and they're taking care of themselves. Or, and I mean, even like Jared, when he was, I don't know, he was like 13, 14 years old, and we were looking for some sports equipment online, and we were going all over and we couldn't find it at the manufacturer's site or anything like that. And I said, Jared, and this is like, he's 13 years old. All right. I go, Jared, why don't you type in Dick's.com? And he turns around and looks at me and he goes, Dad, I don't think that's the website you think it is. Right? And I was like, bravo, Dad. He was like, I'm going to type in Dick's Sporting Goods, right?
Yeah.
And, like I said, whitehouse.gov is going to do things with the executive branch of the government. Whitehouse.com is not.
Right.
Right. And somebody, and it's being able to understand that. And I think that's as much learning as, like I said, we went to a library.
Yeah.
Right. And walked around and said, okay, I can go find this book. I'm going to boom, here's the card catalog. And now we're off to the races. Google's the card catalog and it always will be.
Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, the underlying technology is an index.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful. Like, I got to tell this story. I really don't talk about my kid too often, but it fits this narrative we're spinning. So we're sitting here. We like watching like Coyote Peterson, Bear Grylls type wilderness, Steve Irwin type videos, right?
Yeah.
She is really into, like, especially bugs, right? And so we're watching this video yesterday. It's like one of the classic Bear Grylls one where he bites the grub and eats it. And she sees all the stuff squirt out and she's like, hey, why does everything have blood? I'm like, that's a great question.
Yeah.
That's a great question, man.
And that's when you got to go to YouTube and start educating yourself, right? You're like,
yeah. Well, see, and it's competency again, even as a parent.
Right.
I mean, you got to be able to at least, if you don't know the answer, fair enough, right? But help them and guide them to find the answer. And then for me, I turn it into something. Now, I happen to be able to explain that to her a little bit. At least it made sense to her 4.5-year-old brain. And then she just wanted to see him eat something else that was gross.
It's poop humor.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, totally.
Everything's poop humor, right?
Totally.
So, and I mean, and if you're a guy, it's going to be poop humor when you're in your mid-50s.
Right? Yeah, you just don't really get out of that part. Yeah, it's always funny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, I think I tell you what, I'm interested to, especially with your hot peppers this summer, is to end up tasting some of those. I'll have to drive down there later this summer and check it out.
Yeah, man. You're more than welcome anytime, dude. We're going to have, now that's my wife's domain, because my wife actually cans her own salsa. She has her own recipe.
Really cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, actually last night we were just talking about, my wife is still in that phase of her life where she's maybe kind of trying to figure out what she wants to be as a human being. You know what I mean? Which is beautiful.
I mean, we all are, right? I mean, that's, if you're done, then, go out and start shoveling and throw yourself in the hole.
Right. So we have a little over an acre on our main property, and then family owns a giant tobacco field, and across that field we have another property that's her parents, but it's ours, where we kind of share it. And we have a couple acres available. That's where the main garden is. So, like, the main garden is like 1,000 square feet, something like, it's huge, dude. And then now we have this new vertical system. And so I bought the seeds. I kind of came up with the idea of how to position things, reading the almanac, but she picked it. So there's jalapenos, poblanos, there's sweet peppers. Nice. Man, there's everything, dude. Everything.
We were talking about this before. There's the Ghost Reaper pepper.
Yeah.
It's a genetic blend of a bunch of different peppers, and they're smoking hot. And then the place where I go to get wings in Virginia Beach, they part of the year they'll get peppers from this guy, and he smokes them. And I think for those people that aren't big hot food eaters, some of the problem with eating hot food is it gets so hot it loses taste. Yeah. And this food is smoking hot, but it still has taste. And the reason it does, I think, is because they smoke them, and with some of the capsaicin in the back, there's like always a metallic tasting back end to me on really hot peppers, and I think that's the greater amount of capsaicin. And this doesn't have it. And the owner of the restaurant will say that myself and my son are the only two people that'll have the wings rolled. Everybody else will get them and they'll lightly dip them. And so he can only get it part of the year. And so I started looking on the internet about potentially getting some of those. I just want the powder. I just want to be able to mix it in with sauces I make and things like that. And a lot of it is, you're talking a quarter of a teaspoon if you're making a family-sized batch of barbecue sauce, right? I mean, any more than that, and you might as well just call it off. And what I found out was the guy that developed this pepper, and it's his livelihood now, and he's killing it. He's doing great. Was an alcoholic. He hit rock bottom, and he was in rehab. And while he was there, kind of getting himself together and along the way, he started doing this, this gardening, and he was into peppers, and he figured out how to genetically splice all this stuff. And now today he's got a great business being the ghost pepper guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's, again, we were talking about, having your hands on the earth, right? And there's something, it's the old thing where they tell you to go outside and walk in your grass barefoot.
Yeah.
Right. And the same, you connect with the earth and be grounded, right? It's a big yoga principle, and be grounded in what you're doing. And I think that's, we focus on the big, Monsanto. You know that Monsanto actually has the bad reputation, but they're not the chemical company anymore. They're like a holding company. They're a holding company. I met the CISO at an event not so long ago. He goes, we're not even the bad company anymore. I'm like, okay, just because you've been on the right side of this for 5 minutes doesn't mean you get a pass, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like, it kills me because they're trying to walk away from that in a big hurry, right? Well, sorry, you can't. And I mean, like if you food sources is another thing. Like there's things that humans are allowed to eat in the U.S. and only partially told, I was told if you can't pronounce everything that's on the label of a food source, maybe you shouldn't eat it.
Yeah, right.
That's and we go up and down, and everybody does great with that some days and not so great the others. But over here, they just got Burger King, and it's a sit-down restaurant. And the hamburgers, I've not had one, but the guys that have been to the U.S., they're like, no, yours are all salty and blah. Ours are like, and because you're not allowed to have all these, byproducts because they don't even freeze the hamburgers. It's more of a Five Guys type mentality where we use fresh beef. It's concept. We've all seen the thing where they sit a McDonald's or a Burger King hamburger out on the counter for 3 months and it's still there, and it's not. It's like, and I'm surprised they haven't grown a tail.
Right.
From all the stuff you're eating, right?
Yeah. Well, like the big thing for me is bread. Like, I'm sure maybe you've done this, right? Don't eat bread for like a month and then have a piece and it tastes like a fucking donut. There's so much sugar in it.
Right. I mean, as a function of getting older and trying to stay in shape and things like that, because I've bad arthritis. And so trying to keeping my weight down and eating properly and not getting into things that inflame me.
Yeah.
That fits, I'm diligent about that. I mean, hey, every now and then I want a hamburger, but sure. I'm going to go get a brioche roll. I'm going to do it right. I'm not going to go there. It's like, I'm going to do grass-fed beef, and I'm going to sit there in my patheticness with grease dripping down, and I'm going to be fine. Right.
Right.
And the net of it is, I feel so much better. And a lot of it is, everybody needs carbs, right? Carbs fuel brain function, cognitive dissonance, and everything like that, right? But where do you get them from, right? And since we've decided that, and hey, wheat served a great purpose, right? We were joking about it beforehand. I mean, Norman Borlaug, right? Indians were dying; they were starving to death, and this, agriculture geneticist, he came up, he went there and looked at the problem. And the problem was the wheat was tall, and with the weather conditions they had, it would all lay down, and then it would mildew and go wrong.
Right.
Well, Norman Borlaug was the geneticist that figured out dwarf wheat, and dwarf wheat would keep it standing up, and now it changed the world, right? Much in the way when you want to talk about, the potatoes in Europe at the time, right? They kept a whole generation of people alive because we could get a potato out of the ground.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that in the 21st century we don't have the means to go, hey, here's a better way to feed yourself, right? And I think when we go back to the government, my personal opinion is that the corporate farming has lobbied and gotten legislation passed that makes it very tough to be an organic farmer, right? And just not doing. I mean, if your property was probably 5 acres bigger, there'd be somebody from, some agricultural entity or at the county or state level asking you what you're going to do with all your vegetables, right? And you could prove that you're not steaming them up with steroids or whatever, right?
Right.
And things like that. I mean, and I believe that, when you look at girls are in particular, like when you have girls going through puberty at 9 years old, not to put a tinfoil hat on or anything, but you probably trace that back to regular milk and non-organic chicken.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Even
Sure.
all the big producers now are slowing down on antibiotics, slowing down on that stuff because we have a little bit more than anecdotal evidence that that a regular cow without all this stuff can't be 2,500 pounds.
Yeah, right,
Right. And it's and the other thing too is I've had people like when they had grass-fed beef for the first time, because it's a texture difference. They're so used to grain-fed beef that it's structurally much stronger, and they're like, man, this is kind of mushy. Well, yeah, because we didn't turn this thing into the Arnold Schwarzenegger of cows before we whacked it and put it across the table, right?
Right.
That's the big difference.
Well, and that was a big motivator for us coming to specifically where we're at, was the ability to be a little more autonomous, particularly with our food.
Right.
Well, and part of that too is it's a much lower cost of living here, but we knew that we were making some economical changes in our family structure. Like I knew eventually I would switch universities. My wife now again has the option to not work if she doesn't want to, or go explore whatever she wants to explore. And that's part of the freedom. But to do that, you also have to lower your economic footprint.
Right.
And so a big way to do that, like, in California, it wasn't uncommon to spend upwards of $400 on a grocery bill.
Yep.
And part of that is because it's California and so forth and so on. Well, here it's infinitely cheaper. And it's going to be even more infinitely cheaper when we have like zero produce we have to buy because we're growing everything. And this is why I'm so excited with this vertical hydroponic system is, this 1,000-foot tilled land garden directly translates into its 5 poles, 2 rows. So 10 poles each, 10 poles total. And you can put about 4 plants in a bucket and you can get upwards of 8 buckets per pole. It's like 200 to 250 plants in this 10. Yeah. And dude, it's like 20 square feet.
And what are you growing with that? What vegetables are you getting out of that?
The only thing you can't really grow in it, or you have to be careful with, are things that are heavy vines. So like pumpkins, tomatoes you can do.
Oh, big heavy vines.
Big ones, like big. We like a lot of gourd type plants because they keep on. They're easy to cook with, like squashes, pumpkins, so forth and so on. Watermelon. That you got to be careful with because of its weight. But dude, everything else you can put in there, including tomatoes. You just got to train them to kind of like grow down instead of grow up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, the system. We have 4 different kinds, man.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm super excited. And so the other thing too, like with the autonomy piece is, I like to tinker, and I like to tinker a little bit with genetics, and because of the information, and the internet. I don't need a lot of expensive equipment to cross-pollinate things, and I can control my environment. The office I'm in right now, if you don't know this, is outside. So I have a self-contained office detached from the house. And so I can control everything in here. Right?
And reality, right? Yeah,
that's right. That's right. That's right. And so, if we want some hotter peppers or some different tomatoes, or we grow a lot of potatoes too, sweet and regular.
Yep.
Big russet, small red ones, all kinds of stuff, man. Dude, I can just tinker in here over the winter because I can control the electricity. I can control the heat, so forth and so on. And now it's a hobby. Now it's something that you can do and, see where it leads.
Yeah. No, I think that we moved up from rural Virginia to the suburbs of Boston when I was a kid. And when we were there, my dad was an engineer for General Electric, and they bought a big piece of land in the middle of nowhere because that's where the General Electric built an office and started growing stuff, and read up on it. Amateur. As an engineer by trade, so he was like, "I'll figure this out." And we had so many cantaloupes and watermelons and everything that we were taking bags of food to school to give away to the teachers and stuff like that. Because it's like, I remember now memory being a little kid of 9 or 10 years old, it seemed to me like the whole back end of the garage was filled up with potatoes. Right. And it's like, oh man, I couldn't contemplate that. Right. As my dad, and the land had a little bit of a rise to it and went back, and they grew a lot of strawberry plants. And my little sister loved strawberries, but she was allergic to them. And she would go back there and sit down. And when she sat down, you couldn't see her. And she'd come back with a big red rash around her face. And you're like, but my mom would be like, "You have any strawberries?" She's like, "Nuh-uh." It's like, okay, go to the mirror, right? Is that your story? You're going to stick with it, right?
Right.
And then that became like, that was a family joke forever, right? And as we got older and you could become a miscreant, which I did, my dad would say, we'd come in, hey, what'd you do? And he'd tell him your wild story, right? He was like, okay, you're gonna stick on that. You're gonna stick with that lie. You're gonna work on a better one. And you're just like, I'll be back, right?
Yeah.
And it all started with like, hey, how do I know? How do you know? Well, you're an adult and you've been around the world for a little bit, but some things are so easy. But I've always said, I want to do a garden. I want to do this, and then I travel all the time, right? And I think as you get older and you get stationary, and you want to pick a hobby, why not make a hobby you can eat?
Yeah, right. Like there's zero downside to it, and it's not even that expensive to get going. I mean, the in-ground garden was zero. You know what I mean? Luckily we live around my wife's family, and they're all tobacco farmers. You know what I mean?
Right.
And now they don't grow tobacco anymore. They grow alfalfa, which is an interesting thing, man. Like I've started to do the math on this, like how much this dude's getting per bale, and it's just grass, so it's free. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, man, this is kind of interesting. Anyway, and so we just asked him a favor. Hey, dude, can you till this size for me? And I staked it out for him.
Yeah.
I don't even have to buy a tractor, man.
Probably took him like 15 minutes to bang it out, right? A little more.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not like, a favor. That's easy. I'll tell you something. When you look at tobacco, right? And I think this is a larger thing for Americans collectively putting their head in the sand about the larger world. And I don't want to get off on a rant about Americans not traveling. And it's the old adage, if you don't want to be a racist, travel.
Yeah. Right.
If you don't want to be a fascist, read, type of thing. But in Kosovo, you're not manly if you don't smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everybody smokes, and they've tried to keep the smoking out of restaurants and everything. And well, if you've got an outdoor space, you can smoke, but in the wintertime, they cover them up. And then, well, technically, if we pull the curtain back, and so there's this thing. And so I think just like anything else, just like energy, just like coal and every fossil fuels, as we lower our footprint, which we are, as we lower the amount that we're using, the rest of the world is not, that supply is not going to waste. Right? And what you can make cigarettes for over here is dirt cheap. Right? And ask yourself this. Years ago, when I was still in the Navy, I went and became a hazardous material coordinator. And you learn about all the things you can put on airplanes, ships, everything, and how they have to be put together, how they have to be packaged for, train transport, air transport, all that stuff, right? One of the things, this was a long time ago, and this sticks with me to this day, is if you're going to take liquid nicotine, like you extract the nicotine from the tobacco plant, you're taking liquid nicotine, and you have a Gatorade bottle, like a 1 liter bottle. That's the most you can take on a passenger airplane. Because if it cracks and opens and leaks in the ventilation system, at a very minimum, it'll make everybody really sick.
Right.
And my question was, well, okay, and this is before I really understood Nicorette patches, because this was 25 years ago. Why do we need to have liquid nicotine if we're not pumping up the natural, and what's all of that going to, right? And now it's Nicorette patches and things like that. But how dangerous is that to the to be consumed, right? And I don't know if it's still true today, but I know when I was a lot younger, that the only food substance, the only substance that humans consumed in the U.S. that the full ingredients weren't completely known and were by law weren't allowed to be published were cigarettes.
Right. I think that's still true, man. I mean, I think people figured it out, but I don't know in the U.S. that it's printed like on a label on the packaging.
Right. I think the word's out in the street that cigarettes are bad for you. And I like the signage over here. Like if you look at, they're big. One whole side of the pack is, cigarettes will kill you. Cigarettes will harm your young child and all these other things. Right. But everybody here smokes. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's nothing to watch. Even some of the guys who work with, it's nothing to watch them go through 2 packs of cigarettes in a day, and they'll go down and they'll heat them up, and then they'll go back in and work. But that's, I think, the false sense of security sometimes in Americans is like, oh, smoking is disappearing. No. I think the same thing with, when people want to talk about climate change and like that. I'm not getting on a climate change thing, but I think there's an argument, when people say, hey, we pulled out of the Paris Peace Accord or Paris Climate Accord, we're doing this, we need to do this. Well, are we going to financially break ourselves as a nation to do those things, which in some cases we would have to, right? When you talk saying trillions of dollars, like I don't know where those trillions of dollars are coming from. We're already trillions of dollars in debt. How are we magically going to turn all this around, right? This is for me, it's a finance argument. It's not a social argument, right? But assuming that we don't have the money to do that, and we are trending on a green as a nation, we're taking it seriously. We're just not doing it at an alarmist pace. Right. But when you hear like the Indians, they're like, no, we're not going to join that. And then everybody gets their, their panties bunched up. And it's the best argument I've ever heard. Wait a second. At the turn of the 20th century, you basically belched crap into the air at a pace that should have annihilated the planet to become the great industrial nation you are. And now you're going to deny us the same opportunity.
Right.
And China, you're looking at a population difference of, an order of, 8 to 10 times more population. They are going to put more crap in the air,
right,
in order to survive. How are they going to do that? And what's important to them, right? And I think that's when you talk about it globally. I heard there was a guy, and he wasn't in complete rant mode, but he was right at the precipice, right? And that listening to people's opinion who differs from you, a lady, she didn't want to ask a question. She wanted to opine.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, how can you work for companies that support this with the planets, this, that, and the other, we're going to be the planet's going to go broke and be ours, right? And he said, no, it's not. And he was very matter of fact about it. And she would say, no, it's not. And then she kept going, and they're finally like, can I answer the question? And the moderator finally made her just sit down. And he's like, here's the reason I'll tell you that it's not. The least amount of sea rise that people are predicting is 10 feet. Right? At 10 feet, Florida's gone. Houston's gone. Where I live's gone. You're probably a beachfront town. Right? California's gone. Right? And they're saying it's going to happen within the next 10 to 20 years. Right? And 10 or 20 years ago, they said it was going to happen within 10 or 20 years. Right? So that is proof enough to me. Right? I don't have to be a climatologist to go, okay, they really, it's still a work in progress, right? And and this is again, give me something sensible to bring my hat on. He's like, last year, how many 30-year mortgages did all of these mortgage companies write? And how many insurers insured all those homes that are in that area? If in the time of that mortgage, that 30-year period, that when they look from an actuarial standpoint, that they could, what's the indemnification of that?
Right.
They wouldn't write the policy.
Right.
They just wouldn't write it. They would be like, no, we're not going to do it. Right. And that to me is the most sensible, because you can find, well, we went to the polar caps and we pulled this out, and this ice layer 17 years ago says that we're trending. Well, none of you were around the last 2,500 years when it went around. Do I agree that the planet's going to find its own level? Right. And that in some, and I think some of it's institutional arrogance, and some of it is people have an agenda that they want to advance. Right.
Sure.
But give me a sane thing I can pin my hat on. And it's like, you're right. Banks and insurance companies are not in the business of losing money. And if they felt that it truly was, because I'm sure they got people that are looking at it as well. Because I can't just imagine they would go, well, forget it. If it happens, we're all done anyway. So we're just going to scrape all the nickels off the ground right now.
Right. Right.
Do you see that happening? I don't.
No, man. And I think, and this goes back to kind of what we were talking about with social media. It's very human and very characteristic to want to boil very complex arguments down to little bits. And so this whole discussion around climate is either the climate's changing or it's not. And if it is, it has to be because of us. Well, maybe it is. Okay, but to me,
maybe it isn't.
Right. But to me,
change, right?
Yeah, but to me, it's like I felt this way with, and I still do with Iran and their nuclear development. I feel this way with India and China and their industrialization, or other what used to be third world nations that are now second, getting into first world development. You can't deny them their sovereign right to manifest destiny just because we've already achieved it, right? I think that's bad for the human race. And you also, I think, can't allow yourselves, to get trapped into it's us versus them, adversarial. It's just this simple, either you can have nuclear development or you can't. It's not that simple, man. Because what you're ignoring, to me, this is my opinion on most of these things, is you're ignoring those general higher order first constructs, which is what is our manifest destiny as a species, because it's not just the US anymore. It's not just Iran and China. This is a global economy and a global information society, right? I mean, the World Wide Web gives us that. It's one of the beautiful things about modern technology. And we still want to act.
It's a Star Trek analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's very much like that.
Yeah.
I think more federation, less New World Order, right?
Well, but no, I think the thing is, and there's going to be that big struggle. Right now the big call is, how are we getting to Mars?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And we effectively ignored space exploration for 30 years for a bunch of reasons, good or bad, right? But when we start going to other planets, now you remove from being, I live on Main Street, to I live on Earth.
Right.
Where do you live? Oh, I live on Earth.
Right.
And I think that's, and that's, trust me, I mean, people have been killing each other over lines in the sand for over thousands of years, right? So we have family friends. I know a bunch of astronauts, mostly because they're former SEALs or they're active duty SEALs that became astronauts. But my father-in-law knows one in particular because it was his best friend's son. Unbelievably gracious dude. And we got him to come to Virginia and talk to, at the time, my daughter's K-8 school and my son's high school.
Oh, awesome.
And yeah, the one of the things you notice about what I imagine to be the stringent NASA thing is, what's their personality? How do they deal with everybody else, right? And so the K-8 discussion was, again, poop humor. Hey, how do you go poop in space, right? Mm-hmm. And he's got a great answer for that and things like that. When he got to the high school kids, and especially the juniors and seniors, because he split them up, in a large it was just due to the amount of space in the auditorium. But at the end with the juniors and seniors, he took a picture of the Middle East from space, right? And he said, "What is this?" And some of the kids are like, "Well, it's the desert, so it must be the Middle East." He goes, "What don't you see?" And he was like, "Borders." Right? And that's, he's had the privilege to have been in space multiple times. Right? And he goes, "You know what I can't see from there is a line on the ground."
Right.
I know when I pass America because I can see Florida. Right? And I can see Cape Cod. Right? But the rest of it is, where does the US stop and Canada begin? Right? So that's the altruistic piece. Right? But I think certainly right now, when you start talking about some of the immigration issues we're having, right? Today we have laws, right? And you can agree with them or disagree with them. And I think this is part of the, that social media construct is, if I disagree with the law, I immediately demand that we have to ignore it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so no, we have a system, right? And it's, we can argue about the people we put in there to navigate that system or anything like that. But we have a system of immigration. Right? And if you've ever been to a naturalization ceremony, it's an awe-inspiring thing. Right. And most naturalized citizens, because of the testing that they have to go through for citizenship and everything, know more about the way the government functions than, people who, in their view, are accidents of birth.
Right.
Right. You got to achieve greatness because it was an accident of where your mom and dad live. Well, right now, when you talk about the insane thing to me is when people say, if people show up illegally, right? If you go the other way, and you go to the Guatemala, I think it's the Guatemala border with Mexico, the penalties are extremely severe for people that illegally enter the countries, and I think they should be, right? Because it's not. Yes, do I think there's a negative thing? But if you look on our southern border, some of that problem was created because Americans got too good to pick vegetables or do things that other people, they clean rooms, all what my parents and my grandparents at the turn of the 20th century would have called entry-level American jobs.
Right.
Things that the Irish weren't too good to do, things that the Eastern Europeans weren't too good to do, working in coal mines back then and doing those types of things, right? But I think when you say, hey, we're not going to control how we allow access to a country, I'm not talking ours, I'm talking any country, right? That you cheapen the experience for the people that want to come and emigrate there and become new citizens. And I think that's that's what we need to be talking about more, and less of, separating kids from their parents and all the other nuances, right? Nearest I can figure from, what, and I'm not going to tell you, I dove into this with great, remember, I'm the guy that can't do a correct Google search, but the concept of that whole separated children thing that's a law right now, right? And it's been on the books for 10, 12 years. Can we say it's a bad law? Sure. right? But it's a law right now. And ignoring it just because it makes you uncomfortable, right? The easiest way to get a law changed is to do what? Enforce it.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And when we get on and we get the pitchforks and arrows out and we start demanding change, well, let's get rid of the electoral college. Right. Well, okay, how many people really know why we put that in place in the first place and why it's still a really good idea?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Second Amendment's the same thing. Let's get rid of it. Well, we understand that we can't use the constitutional constructed way to get rid of the Second Amendment. It was easy to get rid of alcohol. We can't get rid of guns.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And,
we saw how well that works for alcohol. I mean, it's the perfect casebook example.
Right. But I don't, here's the thing. I'm a big believer in all the amendments, right? Because my thing is like, we can start taking them away one by one, but eventually we're going to get to one you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I always tell people, Fourth Amendment, quartering troops or thing. I'm like, hey, let's get rid of the Fourth Amendment and see how that works out for everybody.
Yeah. Right.
And let's start with that one. Because that can be really intrusive, right? But when all of these things that we see on social media that we get everybody gets upset about is, let's go back and focus on the system of laws we have. If you don't like what that is, I want you to stand in the middle of the room and I want you to scream about it at the top of your lungs, right? Because I want change. If that's really what the majority wants, I want change. Because the Electoral College and the Supreme Court were the only two mechanisms that the federal government has that are designed to protect the minority. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. And those are great things. It's why we're a republic and not a straight pipe democracy. Mm-hmm. Right. And, majority rules has never worked out ever.
No.
Right. That's not the check and balance that we need. Right.
Yeah, right.
I mean, if it's the majority you want, then, hey, I'm fine. Let's vote for more of that. But how's that worked out? Right. And the majority is never who we have to worry about. It's the miscreant minority.
Yes.
Right? 6 million people were Nazis, and look what they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That's it's that big majority that becomes irrelevant for a number of really, usually awful reasons.
Right. Right.
And I think I'm more attuned to it now because I'm sitting in Eastern Europe with the amount of ethnic cleansing that's gone on over the years, and certainly back when I was still in the military. I mean, we saw some horrific things from really bad humans. And even now, a lot of them that were, they're older now, they're my age group and older, that were on the ground. And I'm not saying everybody was shooting people and burying them in shallow graves, but there's genocide, and then there's like, hey, you're a really bad person. People walk that away, right? And to my mind, it's like when Eisenhower came over the hill and saw the first concentration camp, he said, I want you to get as many cameras in here and take pictures, because someday, about 70 to 100 years from now, some damn fool is going to say this didn't happen. Yeah. And we have people denying it right now, about 70 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, the man was a visionary, right? And that, from a global perspective, you look at it and go, yeah, hey, eventually it'll be, a full thing. When it's not in our lifetime, right? And maybe not even in our kids' lifetime. But I think that is going to be more dependent on the trajectory of technology and how much effort we want to put into leaving this planet for a protracted period of time and being able to do it that doesn't kill everybody that leaves.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be a death sentence. To send somebody out into space, it can't be a death sentence.
No.
Right. We got to figure out how we can have gravity on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Right. And do those things. Right. But that is going to deal more with thing right now. Sovereignty is important to people. Right. And I think it should be. Right. But it's much in the same way as if you take it to your neighborhood, right? Yeah. Why do we have a registry of sex offenders, right? Because we should, right? And if you have kids, you should know where those folks live, right? Well, that's on the global stage. When you talk about people not being able to have nuclear weapons, like we want to keep them out. As a global community, we don't want X country to have nuclear weapons. Why? Because they've not demonstrated the responsibility and the restraint to use those. And I can't think, I'd say use them is the wrong side, to not use them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then as crazy as the concept of mutually assured destruction is, that 50s mentality that if I've got 1,000 nukes and you got 1,000 nukes, look at India and Pakistan, right? India has enough nukes to crush Pakistan 10 times over. But you know what Pakistan has in their favor? The jet stream.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? So anything you launch into Pakistan is you've got to be concerned about what's coming back on your own people. And that turns out to be its own system of, mutually assured destruction, right? Because Pakistan has, you have the ability, they could launch a small nuke in there, and Pakistan could turn around and do 100 of them in return and wipe them off the face, turn them into a glass factory over there, but then they're done, right? Those are the types of things that I think we need to be concentrating on, because you're not going to get rid of sovereign nations.
No,
right?
no.
And having a frank discussion about religion, race, and all those other things, and not ignoring the things that make us uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Right? I'm a big believer that the Klan should be allowed to be on the news every afternoon and just say whatever they want.
Yeah.
Because it shows people in a real hurry that they are off on the fringe of everything that's bad.
Right.
Right.
Well, right. Because generally speaking, I have to assume that the vast majority of people aren't going to agree with those worldviews. And so the more you make it public, the more people get exposed to just how, and this is my personal opinion of it, just how fucking ridiculous that mentality is. Right. And so then it's no longer this dirty secret that gets hidden in the dark so it can fester like a cancer.
Right. I truly believe that. You get the really bad people, put them out in the middle of the room and give them a microphone and say, get after it, brother.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
It's like, and I give you crazy.
Right. And maybe I'm youthfully optimistic, but maybe there's some of those, clearly not all of them, but some of those people that if they were exposed to themselves that way, might go home and take a shit and think to themselves, hey, wait a minute, man. Yeah. Maybe I'm going about this the wrong way. That was pretty ridiculous.
Right. And I think it's all where, especially when it comes to like race and religion, right? And those types of things that it's what really makes everybody uncomfortable here, right? That, oh, you can't say anything bad about these people, but it's okay to say something bad about these people because we have a worldview that's, those types of things. That the getting that out there and saying, hey, look, the way this stops is whatever the bad behavior is, we stop teaching our kids.
Yeah.
Right. We just stop teaching our kids that, right? And say, hey, it's not okay to behave in the fashion you behave. And one group doesn't own bad behavior.
No.
Everybody has their own bad behavior. And you can say, because I've heard people say, well, that's a defensive behavior based on offensive. I'm like, stop.
Yeah. Right? No. Right. It's a human thing.
Right. It's a car accident, right? Both cars are damaged, right? Let's back up, get the cars fixed, and go from there, right? But I think that's really, because that leads. But again, it all comes back to, we're on this arc of technology, and that arc is going to facilitate change. We can argue whether it's good or bad, but that in itself is going to facilitate all the change that we're coming up, and it's not going to slow down.
No.
Right? And like this, I used to say 10 or 12 years ago, when people, especially working for the government, where people didn't want things out there on servers and things like that. I'm like, hey, I think this internet thing's going to catch on.
Right.
Right. I mean, because it has to.
Look at it in the scope of our lifetime. You went to a very specialized group of people that could create the hardware necessary to perform personal computing. And that was ultra specialized, and only a few groups did it. Like Steve Jobs, Wozniak, Bill Gates. That's it. A few other people, right?
Right.
And now we're at a point within a generation where it's no longer that. It's pretty much anybody they know can create the software.
Right.
Right.
And the hardware,
anything you want it to be.
The hardware is ubiquitous and nobody cares. Just go out and get anything and figure it out.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that's really the growing pain, right? Because now anybody can do it. I'll give you an example. I was during RSA this year, I went to a thing called the Offset Symposium, and it runs adjacent to RSA. And I got an invite from a friend of mine, and it was super interesting because the discussion panel I sat in and watched was, they had a guy that he was a naturalized American, but he was Chinese. He worked at Stanford, and his sole focus was watching China from an economic and military standpoint, which he views are the same thing, right? And then somebody from Defense Innovation was there, and so people, it was a great talk, and it was a great world look at China and what they do and how they do it. And one of the statements was, one of the reasons China is beating us economically and doing some of the other things they're doing is because they haven't been fighting a war. They haven't been fighting constant war for the past better part of 20 years. And so they haven't spent all the resources on that, right? But what more interests me was the defense innovation in the military industrial complex. He's like, that got created for a very specific reason. The government itself could not have oversight over all of these, from post-World War II to today, everything that needed to be built and needed to be constructed to a standard by trustworthy people. So the big boys in defense industrial complex, they assume certain bad behaviors from the government. They're told what they can sell it for. They're told how much they can pay their people. They're given all of these things. And so they create an uneasy trust between enterprise and the military in particular,
Right.
but the government in large, right? And you have organizations like DIUX, the Defense Innovation Unit, that their sole purpose is to help small business be able to get, shorten that train of innovation to execution to deployment, right? And so in doing so, the number one thing that they said, and I've heard this before, and it was a good reinforcement, that's stifling innovation in the federal government is the fact that we can't pass a budget.
Right.
That we do everything under continuing resolution with these budgets. And, it's, in my view, it's like Congress really has only one responsibility. Job number one is to pass a budget.
Right.
What's job number two? Who cares if you're not doing job number one? Right.
Yeah.
And, and the thing, and they're probably, one of the recommendations, and I thought this was, it really struck me as as a guy that manages small businesses, so it was infuriating. Their answer to how to get this new technology in was go to a bigger, go to one of the big boys that can partner with you. Well, they go to the big boy, they partner with you, they're going to siphon your idea, right?
Yeah.
They'll buy you for pennies on the dollar, and now you're an employee again. Not why people want to be innovators and entrepreneurs and things like that. Solely because that big boy has already been vetted to the nth degree, and they know the process, right? And it's a process thing. And even DIUX and everybody else is like, hey, until they start passing budgets, the little guys can't absorb the time lag to do that.
Yeah, right.
And that's right. Whether that's with NIAP, like with mobile devices, in things with NIAP certification and things like that. NIAP certification for mobile voice and messaging can be up to $1 million.
Right.
We couldn't absorb that. No company I've been with that's in the early stages can absorb that. Well, what's the workaround, right? And it's not a workaround of compliance. It's saying I'm going to take technology, because those laws were written for landlines and servers and all these other crazy things. And with hardware, I totally get that whole information assurance process, right? Because most of the hardware is made somewhere else, and we have to make sure there's no backdoors in it.
Right.
But with software, right, especially when you're talking about, like in this case with us, it was a voice and messaging app, right? If we agree on the algorithms and we agree on the curves, right? We've agreed on the math. Now just making sure I put it together correctly.
Right. Exactly.
And why does that take $1 million and a year's worth of time to do it? It shouldn't, right? That's the technology piece we have to fix to help everybody out, because we're at a point now where, do you think anybody should be talking unsecure?
No, there's no reason for it.
Right.
Not unless for some reason you choose to, but.
Well, but like I said, but again, that's your choice. If I want to stand in the middle of the street and tell everybody my social security number as they walk by and give them my email address and password and say, hey, come on, check it out, that's on me. But it's a conscious choice, right? And I have control of that. I have control of that documentation, right? Whereas being unaware and giving it away, and I think as technologists, I hope you would agree that part of our job is to be good stewards of the responsibility of, a creation, ideation, however you want to see it, and making sure the final product takes people that aren't as learned, right? Because I think part of technology is to say, hey, people that don't know technology can still use all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think in the US, we're extremely unbelievable app users. We're not really good app builders, right? I mean, and it's as just in the percentages of people doing both. And I'm not an advocate that people should change and we should have this big renaissance of everybody wanting to build apps. But I think that we have to have a basic understanding of technology, which I think in schools we're getting better at it. So that English major has the basic understanding. He doesn't have to be the same as an electrical engineer or computer science major, but you should basically go, hey, I want to see the HTTPS or whatever the next generation of this is, and why. And I think
you're talking about a 21st century form of civics in some way, so that you can participate as a citizen.
Right. It's like when we were kids, they had the, I'm just a bill and I'm only a bill of Schoolhouse Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, they left a whole bunch of stuff out of that song. But, what I mean? But it's that same way. Like, do we put stuff now? And I'll also say, why was Schoolhouse Rock so popular? Because it was on one of 3 channels on a Saturday morning, and it was on the same channel as Bugs Bunny and everything else, right? And it became the advertisements. when they
Yeah.
weren't trying to sell us sugar cereal and all the stuff that sits down at the bottom of the shelves. It was a great way to say, hey, start thinking and contemplating about things that right now should be beyond you.
Right. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
how many parents today, like you can go to Schoolhouse Rock right now. You go to YouTube, and if you want to sit your kids around, you want to talk about, you want to talk about the government. Boom, here, watch this. Get them excited about it because it's a little dumpy Bill sitting there with a little belly on the steps of the Capitol,
Yeah.
and he's doing his thing, right?
Right. Totally.
Actually, the next time I'm in DC, I'm going to wrap myself up in a like that. I'm going to sit on the steps of the Capitol and make somebody take my picture.
That's classic, man.
Yeah, toga, modern toga.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man, dude, I got some gardening I got to get to.
Go get to it, brother. Have a great day.
You too, man. Thank you for the conversation. I love
Oh,
this.
thanks. It was awesome, man. I enjoy doing this.
Yeah, well, we'll be together again next Sunday. I'm assuming
right, there we
Dan
go.
will be with us, but I'll
Yeah.
let you know.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Have a great day.
You too. Cheers,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye bye.